Thanks, Kristen, for organizing this. So this is the next installment in our webinar series for US AMOC Science Team number 3. So the main goal of these webinars is to increase the awareness of all the activities that the different projects are working on. We started off with a salt advection feedback theme, but it has broadened in the course of the past year or so. So we have 2 additional webinars coming up. On April 20th, ACU will be the presenter, and on May 18, Tom Hain will be presenting. But today we have Steve Yeager, who's going to talk about AMOC-related climate prediction using CESM. Take it away, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for tuning in to hear this talk. When we came up with the idea for these webinars, I guess about a year ago, I had envisioned it as kind of a informal research report where you just present basically what's on your desk and what you're working on in kind of an informal setting. And so my presentation today is definitely going to be along those lines. It's relatively unpolished stuff that I'm working on. Still a lot of questions involved, as you'll see. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging the agencies that support this work, as well as the large team of colleagues in CGD who contribute to the Dekado prediction endeavor that I'm going to be presenting today. So this is what I thought I would cover today. Just give you a brief description of what these Dekado prediction experiments are, talk about understanding subpolar North Atlantic mechanisms, and the question here is how important is AMOC for predictions, and finally present some remote impacts that I believe are associated with our skill at predicting subpolar North Atlantic SST. So just to get everybody on the same page, I took this plot from Chapter 11 of the 5th Assessment Report. This was led by Ben Kurtman and Scott Power, and what it shows is global mean temperature from observations, as well as a large ensemble of forced 20th century experiments. Those are shown in orange here, with the ensemble mean tracking quite well the observations of global mean temperature. And so the external forcing, which includes obviously greenhouse gases and volcanic aerosols, gives quite a good level of skill in reproducing the temperature evolution over the late 20th century that has been observed. And what we're trying to do in Dekado prediction is augment that skill that we already have by initializing the climate system to some reconstruction of the observed state and try to get some enhanced predictability as a result. So throughout this talk, I'll be referring to DP, which will be my Dekado prediction ensemble, which usually I'll be referring to the ensemble mean, and then the UI will refer to uninitialized experiments of the 20th century that may be coming from a large ensemble, and I'll also be looking at the ensemble mean skill in those simulations. So we've done 2 sets of Dekado prediction simulations at NCAR to date. If you just focus on the right column here, this was the latest set that was completed in late 2015 using CESM 1. So that's the tag that was used in the large ensemble that many of you may know about. This uses a nominal 1 degree atmosphere and ocean, and as well as sea ice and land models. We do ensemble integrations every year starting in November at each year from 1954 to 2015. So we've got 62 start dates, and we have 10 ensembles per start date. Each of those run out 122 months, so roughly 10 years. So this experiment costs 6,000 simulation years roughly to complete, and that's why these are very expensive, and we've only done 2 of them so far. The stars indicate what we changed relative to our previous version that we analyzed as part of CMIT 5. So we had slightly different models, CAM 5 instead of CAM 4. We added BGC in the ocean, slightly changed the starting method, and significantly, as I'll show later, we slightly changed the ocean ice initial conditions that we used. It's still a core-forced ocean ice simulation that we're using to initialize, but we tweaked the winds a little bit to improve our skill in the Pacific. And so this set of initialized predictions has an uninitialized complement now that's the 40-member CESM large ensemble of the 20th century. And just recently, maybe 2 weeks ago now, we've expanded that ensemble to 40 from 10. So now we're talking about an experiment that is costing 25,000 simulation years. And this is just a cartoon to give you an idea of what this looks like schematically. We have a start date where we are spawning an ensemble of predictions from some a reconstructed state represented by the black line here, which is our core forced simulation. And then we take the ensemble mean and compare our simulated climate at some lead time to the corresponding observations shown in black. And we do that using two main metrics, the anomaly correlation coefficient, which gives a measure of the linear association of these anomalies with your observed counterparts, and the mean square skill score, which is a measure of the mean square error of our prediction relative to some reference forecast, which will usually be the uninitialized simulations. So mean square skill score closer to 1 means that our error has reduced quite substantially relative to the reference forecast. So here's an example of the skill we get from our prediction simulations. If you start at the top left here, I'm looking at annual SST correlation skill for lead years 2 through 5, and you can see a lot of red everywhere, so we're very skillful at predicting SST variability compared to observations over this time period. But as you can see, a lot of that skill is already contained within the externally forced variability. So if we take the difference, what remains is this region that stands out in the subpolar North Atlantic, where we have substantially enhanced skill over the uninitialized ensemble, and we get that through initialization. You can also see some other areas of interest, such as some modest skill improvement in the tropical Atlantic, maybe west coast of the U.S., and in the South Atlantic as well. And this skill persists out to long lead times. So lead years 6 through 9, we still have a very substantial skill improvement in the subpolar North Atlantic. And this is what I'm referring to as AMOC-related prediction skill, because it's not associated with the external forcing. It really is associated with something that we're doing as far as initializing the North Atlantic. And this is just to show you what our skill for upper ocean heat content looks like. This is upper 700 meters, so quite a much broader region of skill enhancement relative to the uninitialized, as you can see in the bottom difference panel. Now you can see skill throughout the tropical Atlantic and South Atlantic as well. So the question is, how are we getting this high skill in the subpolar North Atlantic? And of course, the knee-jerk response is AMOC. But what we argued in a set of papers that you can refer to for more detailed explanation is that part of the skill is related to the predictable propagation of preformed North Atlantic deepwater anomalies that give some thermohaline circulation skill at long lead times. And I'm going to walk you through it briefly, starting at the bottom here. This shows the subpolar North Atlantic SST from observations in blue. That's in this purple region here. And from the core simulation in black. and then the red curve shows our prediction at a lead time of 5 to 7 years. So we're able to predict this cooling and then this cold state in the 70s and 80s, the mid-90s warming of the subpolar North Atlantic, and then a recent cooling trend there. And we argued that this is associated with skillful prediction of the heat transport across 50 north. So this shows how we're able to predict that compared to the core reconstruction in black. And this in turn appears to be related to a very skillful prediction of the spin up and spin down of the Grand Banks gyre. The barotropic gyre in this yellow box here is very skillfully predicted at long lead times, as is the upper ocean density in that box. And we're able to predict that skillfully, even though we're not able to predict density variations in the Labrador Sea. So the interpretation is that we're initializing density anomalies in the Labrador Sea that then propagate predictably into the Grand Banks region, giving us this skillful prediction of SST and winter sea ice extent as well. This is showing how our prediction system compares to some other systems out there in a figure that John Robson provided. He looked at upper 500-meter heat content in the subpolar North Atlantic region as a function of prediction lead time. And our system is the cyan one, and you can see that we're comparing very well to other systems in terms of maintaining high correlation with observations out to long lead times in the subpolar North Atlantic. But the question remains, how exactly are we achieving this skill? If you just focus on the left-hand plots here, I argued that we are able to predict the meridional heat transport quite well, even out to long lead times, 7 through 9. So at latitudes between 40 and 60 north, we're maintaining high correlation scores with the core force simulation, even as we're losing skill at predicting AMOC quite rapidly. So the skill at predicting heat transport is much more robust than the skill at predicting AMOC itself. And the explanation for that seems to relate to this figure, which shows that even though we're losing skill at predicting the maximum AMOC quite rapidly, we are maintaining skill at predicting barotropic gyre fluctuations, particularly in this flank of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, out to lead times of 7 to 9 with correlations of 0.7 or greater. And so it seems that this gyre circulation is part of the thermohaline circulation that we're able to predict quite well, would seem to be part of the explanation for how we're able to predict SST so well in the subpolar North Atlantic. But we are presuming that advective heat convergence is the dominant driver of heat content variability in this region, and it's worth examining how true that is. And so I'm doing that here by looking at the core forced ocean ice simulation and looking at lag regressions with upper 300-meter heat content in this box. So this is at lag 0, and then this is going back in time 5 years at a step. What you can see is that the upper 300-meter heat content starts out as a dipole that then, with a large heat content anomaly south of the Grand Banks here, that then propagates into the subpolar North Atlantic region. And this is the tendency associated with that upper ocean heat content change, showing that the tendency maximizes some years before the actual heat content does. And the heat content tendency then is broken down into advective heat convergence, surface heat flux, and diffusive heat flux. And what this shows is that as far as this regression, which is largely reflecting the multi-decadal heat content variability associated with the mid-60s cooling and the mid-90s warming, advective heat convergence really does play a big role in setting that positive tendency that leads to the heat content anomaly. Surface heat flux appears to play a damping role, but is still important, and the diffusive heat flux, at least within this box, is playing a lesser role. So then we can ask, how well does the prediction system predict these heat budget tendency terms? Before I get to there, I'm going to break the advective heat convergence down into a U prime T bar and a U bar T prime term. So this part of the advective heat convergence is associated with circulation change acting on the mean temperature profile, and this is the opposite. So temperature anomalies advected by the mean circulation. So the advective heat convergence term that plays such a large role in the subpolar North Atlantic is made up of important components that can be ascribed both to circulation and temperature variations. So they're both important. Certainly being able to predict the circulation change is going to give us extra skill, but some of our skill at predicting advective heat convergence is probably associated with this T prime term. Let me skip this and go straight to the correlations now of our initialized prediction experiment with that core force hindcast. And this is showing you different lead years here and different terms. This is the T295, and then these are the tendency terms. So our high skill at predicting this upper ocean heat content out to long lead times appears to be associated with very high skill at predicting the tendency, at least in the first few years of the prediction simulations. After the first 3 years or so, our skill at predicting the tendency is really confined to this mid-Atlantic ridge region. And what we find is skill in all of the terms. So we even have skill in surface heat flux in that region, as well as the less important diffusive heat flux. And this is the advective heat convergence. So basically, we're finding good skill at predicting each of these terms of the budget. And this is the advective heat convergence broken down into U prime, T bar, etc. We're predicting both of these about equally well. And so the upshot is it's very hard to answer the question of how we're achieving our skill at predicting SST. All of the terms of the budget, or at least the advective heat convergence and the surface heat flux, are important. We're predicting both about equally well, and it's unclear whether this U prime term is really the correct explanation for why we're achieving that skill. So a brief summary before I show a few more plots. We found that initialization yields greatly enhanced skill at predicting SPNA heat content and SST at long lead times. This is above and beyond the skill that's due to persistence or knowledge of external forcing. And the southward propagation of North Atlantic deepwater anomalies through interior pathways appears to be an important mechanism for SPNA prediction of thermohaline circulation anomalies and heat transport at subpolar latitudes. However, the THC skill is highest and most long-lasting for the barotropic gyre flow, not for AMOC. And the advective heat convergence is important, but we don't know whether V bar T prime may be just as important for prediction as V prime T bar. So that's an outstanding question. It would appear that the role of AMOC is dubious in this current prediction system of ours, but that might point for room for improvement. If we could predict AMOC better, we might have a longer lasting skill in the subpolar North Atlantic. So now I just want to finish with a few examples of AMOC-related or SPNA-related skill at predicting climate that's of interest to people living on land. And what I'm showing here is the seasonal surface air temperature mean square skill score reference to the uninitialized for summer and winter at 2 different lead times. And what you see is this high skill improvement focused in the subpolar North Atlantic, but extending out to the tropical Atlantic, especially in the summertime, and through the Mediterranean region and over Africa. So this might suggest an SPNA-related skill improvement in those regions. And in wintertime, we see, maybe I'm stretching it a bit, but some skill improvement in the western U.S. in wintertime as well as over Eurasia. And that skill, I have to think, has to be coming ultimately from our skill at predicting SST in this region. Now, I mentioned that we did 2 different versions of decadal prediction so far, one with CESM1 and one with CCSM4. These are comparing the annual surface air temperature correlation coefficients at 2 different lead times. You can just focus on the left column here. What we found in CCSM4 was we had problems in the tropical Pacific associated with spurious ENSOs that gave us negative correlation scores. And we were able to fix that in our latest round. And so our skill improvement relative to our previous prediction set is quite remarkable in the tropical Pacific, but that skill improvement appears to extend over the tropics worldwide and over land in Africa. And so this is something that is a very encouraging development for us. And I'm going to show an example of some ramifications for predictions of precipitation over land. So now I'm focused on summertime precipitation, anomaly correlation coefficients compared to crew observations. This is for lead year 3 through 7 from our former set, CCSM4, and from our new set, CESM1. So here are the correlations with observations, and here's the difference from the uninitialized set. And what you can see is that in our old set, we had basically no skill in predicting or in enhancing our prediction of summertime precipitation over the Sahel. But by improving the tropical Pacific in our new set, we're starting to get pretty significant skill in predicting summer precipitation over the Sahel and over Brazil. And this is with a 10-member prediction set. If we enhance that ensemble size to 40, the skill goes up even further. And this is in line with some work coming out of the Met Office arguing that the real world is more predictable than our prediction systems. And so we can enhance our skill scores by increasing the ensemble size and basically beating down the noise in our model predictions to enhance skill scores. So if I just focus in now on this region over the Sahel, this is the time series from that region. And the black curve shows the crew observations showing drought in the 80s and more positive anomalies after 1990. And the blue curve shows the uninitialized ensemble mean, which gives a correlation of 0.21. And with our initialized set, we're now able to achieve skill scores of 0.81. So this is pretty remarkable, and it is now better than a large multi-model ensemble that was published by Martin and Thorncroft in 2014, where they used all the CMIT-5 models that they could get their hands on and had about a 60 simulation multi-model mean shown in the red curve here for Sahel precipitation. And with just a 40-member CESM prediction, we're able to enhance those skill scores quite a bit. So I've already read through these summary points, and I'll just add these last two. It looks like THC-related SPNA skill appears to reverberate as improved seasonal surface air temperature over land and improved summer precipitation over Brazil and the Sahel region, given a decent tropical Pacific. So if you don't have the tropical Pacific at least reasonably well predicted, then that skill over Africa disappears. So that's all I had to present, and I'll welcome any questions.